Hello class, today we are going to look at Chapter 9, Section 1, and we're going to look at solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. I'm going to look at number 27 in your study plan, and we're going to go through this one, use completing the square, and then I'll also show you how to use the quadratic formula to get the same answer. And we talk a little bit about when it might be appropriate to use one over the other. So let's start by looking at this problem, and we want to solve by completing the square. Okay. The first step that you want to do is you want to work with a lead coefficient of 1. So we're going to go ahead and identify, right now we have a 3. So to create a 1 here, we just divide by whatever we have. 3 divided by 3 will give us 1. In order to do that, we divide everything by 3. So that gives me r squared plus 4 thirds r plus 10 thirds equals 0. Now the concept of completing the square is creating a perfect square so this factors nicely. So we're going to need to move this 10 thirds over to get it ready for the perfect square we're going to create. So now I have r squared plus 4 thirds r equals negative 10 thirds. Notice that I'm leaving a little space right here because we're going to create a number that will allow us to factor this. Okay. So to find this value, we have the formula b over 2 squared. Remember, b is the number that is in front of the r or the x, the term with the power of 1. So in this example, it's 4 thirds. So I have 4 thirds divided by 2 being squared. Well, this is really just a fraction divided by a fraction. So I'm going to flip and multiply. So times 1/2 squared. Go ahead and reduce, so that reduces to a 2 and a 1. So 2 times 1 gives me 2 over 3 squared. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken the b divided by 2 and squared. Well, we haven't squared yet. Just taken b and divided by 2. So 4 over 3 divided by 2, made 2 a fraction, flip and multiply, reduced. Now we have 2 thirds squared. Well, this gives me 2 squared, which is 4, 3 squared, which is 9. This is going to be a key value for us. So let's make a little star so we can come back to that. Once you've done b divided by 2, you wanna keep that value, especially when you're working with fractions. So 4/9 is the number I'm going to add to both sides. Now the left side, what we've created is a nice perfect square that's going to factor. We're going to try to find the two numbers that multiply to give us 4/9 and adds to give us 4 thirds. Well, when it's fractions like this, it's pretty hard to do. That's the reason why we picked to star this. That's going to tell us the number we need. 2 thirds is the number that will multiply. 2 thirds times 2 thirds will give us 4 over 9. And 2 thirds plus 2 thirds will give us 4 thirds. So that's the number, and it was positive, that I'm going to use to factor. So that makes it easy if you remember that b over 2. this up a little bit. Okay. On the right side, we have two fractions. We are adding them. So in order to add fractions, you do have to have a common denominator. So I have 3, I have a 9. My common denominator is 9. So I'm going to need to multiply this by 3, multiply this by 3. I get a lot of questions about that step, is trying to just add those, forgetting that we need common denominators. So that gives me negative 30 over 9 plus 4 over 9. Negative 30 plus 4 gives me negative 26 over 9. Go ahead and check and see if that reduces. Only a 3 goes into 9, a 3 doesn't go into 26. So we have negative 26 over 9. So now we have a square equal to a number, so we can use the square root property, which says take the square root of both sides. So that gives me r plus 2/3 equals, when we take the square root to solve an equation, we get a plus and minus. The square root of negative 26, well, the square root of a negative produces an I. 26 is 2 times 13, so there's no simplifying, so it just stays the square root of 26. Bottom, square root of 9 is 3. Now our next step is bring over the 2/3. So I'm going to subtract it over. And that gives me r equals negative 2/3 plus or minus I square root of 26 over 3. Since both of these have the same denominator, I'm going to make this a single fraction. And the way we do that is we have the negative 2 plus or minus I square root of 26. That's my numerator. And we end up with a 3 on bottom. Now the way Math Excel wants us to write this answer is using commas. So this is the way Math Excel is going to want negative 2 plus I square root of 26 over 3, comma, negative 2 minus I square root of 26 over 3. So notice I've taken the plus and minus, broken it up into 2 there. This is going to be our final answer. So let's go ahead and plug that in, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the quadratic formula and how it may be easier to use for this one and why it may be easier to use. Okay, so we're back to Math Excel. We're going to plug in our answer. Again, notice that we already have the r equals. So I'm going to plug in my values. We have a fraction. In the numerator, we have negative 2 plus, just using the regular I on the keyboard, we have a square root of 26, and I'm just going to click in the denominator to put my 3. Now I need to click the right arrow to exit that first fraction. Again, now we just use the comma, and I'm using a comma because the directions are telling me use a comma to separate answers. And we're basically going to type it in again, but this time we want minus I square root of 26 over 3. We double check our answer that we have written down. Okay, this looks good. And we check our answer. Well done. Okay, so that's solving this quadratic using completing the square. Let's talk a little bit about if that was the best option. Okay, so up at the beginning, when it asked us to solve by completing the square, we noticed that there was a 3 in front. Well, if I divide that number out and it generates a fraction like this, 4/3, using completing the square is not going to be my number one choice. This would tell me to go use the quadratic formula. We're going to get the same answer. Completing the square is handy when the number divides in evenly or it's already a 1 in front. So let's go ahead and look at this problem using the square root, or sorry, the quadratic formula. I'm just going to copy this, take it to a new page. Okay, so let's write out the quadratic formula. So we have x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2 times a. Now remember the a, the b, and the c are coming from our standard form. So we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So my a in this problem is a 3, my b is a 4, and my c is a 10. Now what we do is we take these numbers and we're going to plug them in and simplify. So we have x equals negative b, my b value is 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to figure this out off to the side so I don't have to rewrite the whole problem. So I have 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times 10. Well, 4 squared is going to give me 16. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Times 10 is negative 120. Keep going. 16 minus 120 is negative 104. And I'm going to plug that back in here. Well, that's just to save some room is really all that I did that for. Out front, we have negative 4 plus or minus square root of 104. On bottom, we have a 6. Now, the next step is to simplify negative 104. Okay, off to the side again. I'm going to take that negative 104 and I'm going to simplify it. So negative 104 breaks down into negative 1 times 104, 2 times 52, 2 times 26, 2 times 13. So we have x equals, if I'm going too fast, remember you can always pause it and catch back up. So negative 4 plus or minus. The negative 1 is going to produce an I. outside of the square root. The pair of 2's is going to produce a 2 outside. Left over that we didn't use is a 2 times 13, or 26. We still have the 6 on bottom. Now, we can reduce in the quadratic formula if all three parts have a common term or a common factor that we can reduce out. So notice that 4, 2, and 6 all have a 2 in common. I'm going to reduce a 2 out of both of these. And that should leave me with my final answer. So we have negative 2 plus or minus 1i is just I. Square root of 26. Notice I didn't reduce the 26 inside, only stuff outside, and the 3 on bottom. So notice we end up with the same solution that we got when we were using completing the square. Both of these will produce the same result. This process may be easier for you to do than completing the square because of that fraction that's created. So the process is really up to you. As you start to learn the material, you'll start to figure out what process you like more and focus on that when you start solving problems. I hope this was helpful.